John Coltrane goes 8-bit. So this video is going to be an overview of the EHX bass micro synth pedal, which has been around for many years and is still pretty popular. As with every pedal that you might encounter, the two questions are, what the hell does it do, and is it worth buying it? So why would you want a bass synth pedal? Well, as working bass players doing covers gigs or on original product, you might be required to recreate something that has been done originally on a keyboard or a synth bass, and this is a pretty quick way of getting to those sounds without too much hassle. For me personally, one of the barriers to getting into synths is just the amount of time you have to spend learning about the theory and the programming side of things. Nerdy as I am, I'm not nerdy enough to want to become a keyboard player, so being the lazy bass playing slob that I am, if I can get a pedal to do the job, then so much the better. The bass microsynth takes care of the job of pretty much 3 single pedals that contribute to the classic synth bass sounds, and those are an octave pedal, distortion, and an envelope filter. So the classic synth bass sound through a bass guitar uses those 3 pedals. You can get all of those out of one pedal with this. Now, as we'll hear in the sound tests, they're not the highest quality sound. They're not as good as buying those individual pedals, but this is designed to be a sort of quick, cheap and dirty alternative to spending lots of money on individual boutique pedals for those different aspects of the sound. Let's take a look at the pedal itself. In terms of pedal board real estate, which is a horrible phrase, it doesn't take up that much space. It's about the size of 2 compact Boss pedals, so not massive. Good news is that the power supply is sensible. Unlike quite a few electro-harmonix pedals, this is a typical 9-volt center negative pedal. So just input and output, one switch. We've got loads and loads of options on the front with these sliders. You can see that my bass microsynth has been lovingly abused for many years and now is missing some paint and one of these little caps. So the 2 primary parts of the synth, we've got the voices, which we'll get into a second, and then the filter. The trigger only affects the filters, it does not affect the voice. That's really important. If you turn the pedal over and open it up, there's an internal trim pot which you can adjust using a screwdriver to compensate for the fact that your bass might be quite active and aggressive sounding, or it might be passive and old and dead and have a slightly lower output, so you can compensate for that within the pedal. So here's the sound of my bass on its own. And then if we turn on the pedal, the guitar is the normal dry signal of your bass. So if I turn that up, nothing really happens. So we have to look over here and get the start and the stop frequency to sit about halfway, and then pretty balanced. This is the pretty much the basic sound of my bass. If I take that out for a second, we put in the sub octave. Now that, tracking wise, with octave pedals, everyone always asks about the tracking, can it go down to a low E, whatever. Really, for my money, you've got no business going below an A, because otherwise you get into problems with amps, PAs, and the bowels of your audience members. So here it is walking down. There's a C, B, B flat. Tracks reasonably well at a low A. Starts to flutter a bit at a low G. So the tracking is alright, is reasonable. Now that soloed octave sound doesn't really cut it, I think, to my ears. It doesn't really cut it in the same way that, say, a Boss OC2 does, or similar standalone octave pedals. But again, you're not paying as much money. It's a cheaper alternative, but it does, it does an adequate job. So that's the sub octave for the brown notes. Tells your dry signal octave, adds in an octave above and it's got a bit of distortion in there. Now this doesn't quite do the very, very popular sort of octave up Michael League, Yannick Westala, Angry Insect in a Jam Jar sort of vibe, and it's not going to fulfill those criteria for you, so you need to get something like a Pog or a sub and up or something else that does the dedicated octave up sound, because this, it's alright, but the tracking isn't that rapid, it doesn't quite keep up. So if you're playing tons and tons of notes, then you might need to look for a more recent alternative that has better tracking in it. Last in the voice section we have the square wave, which gives us a lovely filthy distortion sound. Very gated. So pretty quickly, just by dialing in a couple of voices together, you can start to get a pretty filthy synth sound. So crank the square wave up and the sub. So that's all the voices. Here we have an attack delay. Now, this means that you can get a sort of bowed sound to your bass. Did you want that? You can remove the attack. If you combine that with the synth, you get a nice sort of sinister swell vibe going on. Let's take a closer look at the filter section of the micro synth. So I'm going to adjust the trigger to about halfway. That's going to control the point at which my playing sets off the filter. So we need to make sure that it has some resonance. We need to make sure that the start and stop are at different points, otherwise it won't do anything. So let's have that. My volume was turned up. There we go. The question is, with a filter, can it sound like Anthony Jackson on For the Love of Money? Let's see if it can. Again, compared to most single pedal envelope filters, it's a little bit trashy, a little bit glitchy, but again, that is part of the pedal's charm, I think. Flip the resonance if you want, flip the sweep. So one alternative use that might not be obvious straight away is to just use it as a sort of tone filter. So if I have my normal bass sound, which is quite bright and quite modern, if I set the stop frequency fairly low down, you suddenly get slightly different tone. Which, you know, might be useful, might not, who knows. So those are what all the controls on the pedal do. One thing that electro-harmonix does offer, which is really useful, is on the website there's a downloadable PDF with a bunch of sample template settings which allow you to get straight to some classic synth-based sounds with the minimum of experimentation and fussing about. So the good things about the bass micro synth are that it offers a sort of shortcut to some basic synth-based sounds in a fairly small and not too expensive package. Now, the obvious critique is that the quality of the individual sounds is not that wonderful and you're not really nailing the classic tones. But in reality, no one really cares unless you're a bass player on the internet. That's the truth. If you take this on a gig and you use some of the preset from the sample template, no audience members are going to know the difference between this and a future impact pedal or something more expensive, or actually probably even a real synth. Most people are that ignorant of sonic things. So the only people that really care are nerdy bass players on the internet. The downside for me really is the tracking on this thing. It is really, really glitchy. Now, a lot of people on forums and things, and even electro-harmonix, recommend putting a compressor in front of the bass microsynth to sort of even things out, to calm it down, because you do find, or at least I find when I'm playing, that odd notes tend to jump out. That could just be my playing, but I find that it's a bit uneven in its response to an input, so putting a compressor in front of that should help to even things out. Overall though, it's a nice, quick, easy route into getting some synth bass sounds in a hurry and on a budget, so I'd recommend it. You can even, the thing I really like about this actually is that it's so easy to program. It's really, really easy to change the parameters. You don't have to go into any menus. You could even, if you're one of those people that has pedals on top of their amp at gig, you could even tweak it on the fly if you wanted to, and you could actually get some quite nice sort of cheap dubstep sounds. Get the rate somewhere in the middle. You can kind of get some almost like theremin style things. So there you have it. Dubstep on a budget. Budge step.